Okay, today is Thursday, April 20th. The time is 6:31, and I will call the Newcastle Planning Board meeting to order. The first thing on the agenda is the review of the minutes from March 16th, 2023. Do I have a motion to accept the minutes? Moved. Do we have a second? Moved and seconded. Any discussion about the minutes? Other than to say thank you very much. Great job. Great. They look wonderful to me. It's good job. Seeing none, all in favor of approving the minutes from March 16th? 401. All right. Next is our application, map 11 lot 31-001 on Pleasant Street. The street number to be determined, and we have the applicant with us. Want to come on up? So I want to just start by saying that a couple things. Oh, do you have stuff? Great. Yeah. Send them around. Yep.
And I know there was some material presented to Michael, he said it electronically. I do that.
Yep. All right. So
Sorry, you're saying.
no, that's all right. I just wanted to start us off with a couple of things here. This is an application for a new single unit residential building on Pleasant Street in District 4. It has come to us via the code enforcement officer who recommended that it come here for review. And we have in our packets received both a memo and a preliminary findings of fact from the town planner.
Draft.
And so due to the nature of the application and the question sort of contained, I want to start by not jumping right into the review. I want to actually have a little conversation about the memo. And I know at the moment it's sort of hard to separate the two because we are talking about an application, but the application does raise a question about how to think about certain aspects of the code. And so I wanted to maybe start with the memo and have Michael sort of give us a rundown of that, and we can have a little discussion on that before we dive into the actual application.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, as Ben mentioned, there's a couple issues. I think some of them are very straightforward. Most of them probably are fairly straightforward. Some of them are key. So I want to make sure that the board I tried to pull all of the relevant information kind of together from the code. And I just want to make sure that it's highlighted, and then you all can, like, those are the decisions that we need to make sure we focus on. So the first thing is about like the main building mass. And this is a little bit, it's probably different from the way the previous code was. It's different from the way a lot of other codes are, but the way that the Newcastle core zoning code works is it all kind of hinges on that. At least that's one of the main components. So I think I said in here, and hopefully you've all reviewed the memo, but and this is just essentially the definition from the code, which is main building mass is the volume of a primary or accessory building as defined by the dimensional standards for building type and onto which components and roofs may attach. So we're not talking about an accessory building here. We're just talking about primary. And the dimensional standards we'll get into. It's for basically each zone where this application is in the D4 zone, the village residential. So that is essentially just defined. When they say defined, they mean the specifics of it, not how to decide, like, is this a main building mass? It's not. It's really just how wide is the building allowed to be? How deep is the building allowed to be? All right. So there's really kind of, I think, three major clauses that are probably relevant here. This is section 3, subsection C2 from the core zoning code. And that is that Each primary building and accessory building must be comprised of a main building mass with a rectangular form and a single allowed rooftop. This next one is section 3, subsection C4. The outer wall of a main building mass must be located entirely on a single plane. Deviations to the wall plane are allowed only through permitted articulations. However, section 3, subsection C6 stipulates that integral components may be used to cut away space within the boundaries of the roof or main building mass, provided the eaves and ridge beam of the roof are not affected. So if, to be clear, when they're talking about integral, which you may already know, but I just want to make sure that there's basically two types of massing components that we'll get into, massing or architectural components. It's either you could add them on, or you can kind of use them as a cookie cutter and cut them out. So you could, massing additions would be adding on. Integral components are going to be cookie cutters that you kind of can push in. It doesn't have to be all the way in. It can be all the way in, but that's what that integral, it's kind of internal. And so I think that, yeah, so we can come back to all of this too. Section 3, subsections C5, for the purposes of measurement, building length and width standards apply only to the main buildings. The primary and accessory building of primary and accessory buildings. Components have unique dimensions and standards. So when we get into that, that's relevant because this is one of the reasons actually ended up coming here was there was a question of how wide can the building be? Main building mass, I'll just tell you for this district, 50 feet. Here, the building itself is wider than 50 feet, but the main building mass, assuming probably how you, depending on how you kind of interpret it, is probably less than 50. So it's not as straightforward. I know a lot of people like to have like the building can't be wider than, can't be taller than, can't be bigger than. But in this case, it's really the pieces that make up the whole that the regulations kind of zero in. So in addition to that main building mass, I guess, are there any questions about the main building mass that I can clarify now? Obviously, there's more. We can kind of explore that more, but if there's anything that you want to discuss now, I'm happy to. But no.
Yeah, keep going through the memo. This is good.
All right. So the next part is, in addition to these main building mass, there are components, and there's two types of components. So I'll just read this. Components are comprised, because this part is straight from the code as well. Components are comprised of smaller attachments to the main building mass and provide architectural articulation and additional usable space. So like I said, there's two types of components. One is massing components and one is architectural components. They can blur sometimes, but generally speaking, massing components typically allow for the addition of enclosed spaces to add on to the main building mass for primary or accessory buildings. And then the architectural ones typically allow for additions of unenclosed spaces. But to be clear, there are standards for architectural components that allow them to be closed in. Notably, typically when architectural components are allowed to be closed in, they have they require higher percentage of windows and doors. So it's not always, and we'll reference the code, but that's kind of how those populate. So when you look at the code, when you look at each district, another way, one of the things they define is for massing components, that whether they're allowed, and then also kind of where and the number that are allowed. So you have front or side expansions, rear expansions, connectors, probably imagine like breezeways, a lot of times that you see around here, towers and extended shop fronts. Shop fronts not relevant here. It's not commercial and it's not really towers, I don't think. All right, so the types of architectural components, there's a bunch. There's porches, stoops, galleries, dormers, turrets, and more. But and that is another one of these key questions, is not just like what the main building mass is, what the components that are going to be that are used are, but also probably we're going to want to figure out which kinds of components they are. Massing components are pretty straightforward. It's like it's a mass. But architectural components is kind of a variety, and some of them have like little nuances, whether it's I think it was like a stoop or a porch. It's like, and this is the hard part, is that you kind of have to ignore any preconceived notions. If I say stoop, you like don't imagine whatever you know it to be. It's like, what does it say in the code stoop is? And that's why it is different than a porch, or the same as a porch, depending on how you interpret some of this stuff. So that's components, architectural massing components, and main massing. If there's any questions, I'm happy to pause there, or we can kind of go on to what these core questions are that I think are kind of, they're relevant probably for every application, but I want to make sure that we nail it for this one. So you probably saw, but I'll just read them again. The core questions are, what is the main building mass of the proposed building? What parts or part of the building, if any, are massing components? What part or parts of the building, if any, are architectural components? Which ones, and then which architectural components are they? Are they porches, galleries? So that is essentially the memo. I provided some kind of diagrams here because I figured talking about this without actually being able to say, oh, I see this, that, the next thing. I provided these mainly for reference. So, you know, the first one, is this the building mass or is this the building mass? These A and B. And how many massing components are in the front of the rear of the building? How do we classify the yellow forms on either side of the buildings? Are they massing? Are they not? So, you know, I think that we can probably maybe have that conversation, or I guess I'll leave it up to how you want to go from there. We can kind of go through this draft findings of facts and conclusions of law, or we can just look at the application and try and sort this out. But however you want to go, I'm happy to dive in any which way.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions about any of this before we get going? You're signing. If you have a question. You have a question. Yeah. Okay.
And I'll say it took me quite a bit of time to sort through and wrap my head around, because this code's obviously new for me. So I will strongly tell you that, like, there's no stupid questions, because I struggled with it.
Sure.
So
It is a different type of code for sure.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm fine doing it either way. Sort of our procedure or process had been before, you know, sort of before we had planning assistance. I would really walk through the application and the relevant sections of the code and just, you know, turn to the pages and review the standards and kind of go in that way. You have prepared a very nice draft finding of facts, and I wonder if maybe we should get in the habit of using that as the process, and as we encounter the questions that you've outlined in the memo or others that are in the preliminary findings of facts, we go through it and have the conversations in line. Okay. Does that work for everybody? Okay.
And I defined that this document is largely, it ends up being kind of boring, well, for a lot of the issues, because I think one of the most important things in here is to kind of highlight what's not applicable and irrelevant, and just say, like, this is not, so that I can save you the work of having to go through and read. I try to put in here why it's not applicable. Sure. You know, for bicycle parking, it's not applicable as they only apply to as it only applies within the D6 town district. So
yeah. Great.
But
I'm gonna pause you just real quick and let our applicant introduce himself.
Sure.
Yeah, because we're into the application phase now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And, you know, Michael, thank you. I know you helped get this application together as well. I haven't seen the draft finding of fact. I don't know if I'm supposed to, or if that's relevant for me to see, or just something that I can hear from you guys. I'm fine either way. I know that you've been very communicative throughout though, and I'm assuming that it's similar stuff that we've been talking about throughout the last month. So,
It would be something that you would receive a copy of once it's approved.
oh, okay. All right. Got it. So yeah, just a little bit about me. I handed out these, well, not things, just real quick. I think all of you last month when I learned that this was going to be sent to the planning board. Just a bit about me, a bit about us. I'll keep this short because I know there's things that we need to get to, but family of 5, my wife Amanda, we've been married 20 years. My son AJ, he's at Lincoln Academy, he's a senior going to University of Maine at Orono. He wants to be an engineer. He really likes building and engineering. My daughter Harper, she's a sophomore at Lincoln, she's on the sailing team, she's in theater, and then our daughter's at Butte Region, she's going to go to Great Salt Bay. Just a little bit more about us. We've been coming to Maine my whole life, all my kids' whole lives, most of my wife's whole life. We have extended family in Butte Harbor. Been summer residents for a while. My job went remote, so now I get to live here full time. Super, super excited about it. Amanda actually is a former Mrs. Maine. Likes the stage, she likes theater, anything performance. We're actually also both involved in the Lincoln County Community Theater. We're going to be in the upcoming Cinderella production. Mark your calendar, May 5th, 6th, 7th. You're into it. My point is, we really want to be part of this community. We want to be your neighbors, already in the community in many ways. So I just wanted you to know that, face to the name, that kind of thing. And then we start getting into the location of the house. Much of this you already likely know. So the location is just down the street here. Everything on this drawing, lot lines, if you're following along, here, those yellow lines, that's all approximate. That's basically where this is, as Michael mentioned, is D4 residential. Love the location, walkable to town, quiet street, great place. Because as much as we love the location, really, really love the house. So this is our dream home. We actually designed it ourselves with the help of an architect. When we moved to Maine, we looked for land all over the place, right? When we saw this lot, okay, this will work great. First thing I did though, before buying the lot, was to call George, CEO. I actually brought it to his attention that, hey, it looks like this house is 59 feet wide, right? Can I not build this house on this lot? And initially he said, no, you can't, that's not going to work. He and I talked through though a lot because I liked the location and wanted to know more. That's when I started to be acquainted with your zoning. George and I talked through, and George gave me verbal approval to build this house on this lot.
I got to stop you right there. I'm sorry. We don't issue verbal approvals. So without a formal application process, without a formal submission of a permit, there can be no approval. I just want to get the terminology clear
Okay,
because I'm going to just nip that terminology in the bud because the town of Newcastle does not issue verbal approvals for
Understood.
any permit of any kind.
Sure, probably a terminology problem.
Fine.
Let me say it more exactly. George told me I can build the house. Welcome to it. And in fact, when I turned in the building application in February, his comment to me was, I'll get you the permit today. A couple weeks later, I got an email from George saying, I have some concerns about C Street. C Street, as I think you guys know, is a paper road that has since been resolved. But nowhere in the process did George say the house doesn't. Said he said C Street is an issue. I'd like to raise it to the planning board and get there. Please know, I'm not asking to build a house that goes against me. No part of me wanted to come to Newcastle and say, I want to build something no one wants here. I've acted in good faith, gotten George's input. I'm looking forward to getting your input here today. I'm really, really hoping that that this code has the flexibility to allow us to do what George indicated, which was to build this house on that. I'm super hopeful that with your expertise in the code, we can find that flexibility here. I also want you to know, I'm very, very willing to make some modifications to this house. Those modifications are going to be limited. Part of that is because after George indicated the house would be approved, we set in motion a lot of things. We have contractors ready to put ground, we put engineering dollars into this, we got a septic design, we bought the land, right? So we've parted with a significant amount of money, and our project schedule and timeline for building this all hinged on that advice that I received from the code enforcement officer, that this would be approved. I'm very hopeful that not only can I be your neighbor, but that we don't derail the whole project or have me incur further financial hardship and delays by reworking something that I had been given guidance. So super, super hopeful. I know we have to be thorough. I've given Michael some ideas of how I might be able to adjust the plan. I've been up nights and weekends and everything, actually putting together some other ideas that as we get into the discussion, I'd be happy to bring to you too. Things I've worked with the builder and worked with the architects. Hey, here I am. What could we do that doesn't cause the excavation guy and the foundation guy and the engineer and Hammond Lumber and all these people to say, we got to start from scratch. And by the way, you owe me for design. I'm hopeful something like that works. So I guess what I'm asking is that from here, have a conversation on, is there a way to get to yes, either on the house as designed or a conditional yes on, hey, look, dig the hole, right? Or the concrete. Let's adjust some things as we go with framing or windows or something that doesn't sort of have that. So that's me. That's kind of where I'm at, and I'm happy to dive in.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Sure.
You want to start walking us through the
Sure.
finding of facts? Take
Yeah,
it
absolutely.
step by step.
Yeah. All right, so,
You can hit the highlights. You don't got to read the whole thing.
yeah,
Pages
that's,
and
I
pages
think,
and pages.
I think is probably the smart thing to do, the expedient thing to do. So, hopefully everybody knows generally, I included a tax map of where the property is. So, the interesting stuff for the most part is going to be on that second page under relevant zoning code standards. I tried to give you a little summary. Residence is permitted within the D4 Village Residential Zoning District, and single unit residential is permitted as well. Lot dimensions, it meets, it's a little bit irregular, so I'm just telling you at the street, it is 100 feet wide at the street. It's irregular, so it kind of gets broader and comes back, but I assume it shouldn't be an issue. The depth, we don't regulate, and the lot area, we don't regulate. I will say it is 9/10 of an acre, so there's plenty of room for septic. The primary setback, what's proposed is 35 feet, which is the maximum, so that I would say fits. Side setbacks at the closest, I believe it's 15 feet. And 14 feet's the maximum, so, or minimum, I'm sorry. So that should be fine. Rear setback, it wasn't indicated on the plan exactly, but it's like at least 150 feet, which I think we can be confident that meets the 8-foot minimum. And the frontage zone may become relevant later, but it's not so much that there's a minimum or something. It just is letting you know that there is, the frontage zone is 4 feet, and it's essentially the space between the front facade of the house and, 4 feet back from that. And I guess it also includes the front setback. So it's kind of the front setback plus 4 feet. All right, building width, this is something that I know had come up before. I think I actually essentially already kind of addressed it. The house itself is more than 50 feet. I don't know exactly how wide it is because that's not really the relevant measure. The relevant measure is probably, and we can discuss it, 47 feet, 1 3/4 inches, which is just under 50 feet. So I think that it should meet that. That should be fine. The depth is only 25 feet 2 inches. So that meets again the main building mass depth maximum of 50. All right, it is 2 stories, which is how the single unit residential is measured. There is, I'll just tell you, the first floor height maximum allowed 12 feet, the way that's measured. Surface of the floor of the first floor to the surface of the floor, second floor, 12 feet. The proposed is 10 feet, 3 1/4 inches. So that's not an issue. Meets that standard. I think I recommend that you find that it meets that standard. I should say, I don't really have opinions in this. You all get to decide. So when I'm saying like, no, you can completely disagree and discard whatever my findings here are, but all right, so upper floor height, 8 foot maximum is what the code has. The upper floor height here is as proposed is 9 feet. I would like to clarify, when you are on the top floor of a building, there's not another floor above. So you can't do from the surface of this floor to the surface of the next floor. It's from the surface of this floor of the second floor to the plate above the basically above the framing, which the plans measure. So it's not, if you're not entirely clear on what that is, it's not the end of the world. It is defined in here. Tell you that they're measuring what we regulate. Got that. So here it is, it's 9 feet from the surface of the second floor to the top of the plate for the second story. So that one would be over. Number of units, 1 unit max. Propose 1 unit.
So let's pause there and talk about stories,
Yes.
right? Is that what you're gonna say?
No, I think that makes perfect sense.
So because that is the first area where the proposal is outside the standard. The interesting thing about this, of course, is that the house had 12 plus 8 in the code, right? It's 20, and the house is actually less than that by a little bit. If you add the first and second floor heights together. So it's not violating the total height when the stories are combined, but violating the individual standard for the floor height. The question is, what do we think about it?
I should say the code doesn't really say one way or the other. What it does in the table, it just says first floor height, 12 feet, upper floor height, 8 feet. And then separately, because I wasn't sure it was that maximum or minimum, under building standards says, unless otherwise noted, all measurements represent the maximum permitted values. So it doesn't really say whether it's, if you're building a 1-story building, it can't be more than 12 feet. If you're building a 2-story building, it can't be more than 20 feet. It's not. So it's kind of like how you want to interpret that is why there's a planning board. But I just thought I would throw that out there because that's all the information that it gives.
It is an interesting one because from a building perspective, 8 feet on an upper story height, if you measure from the floor height, finished floor height, to the top of the plate, which is up above by several inches. Because usually there's a double top plate. So that's at least 3 inches. And then you come down from that, at least extrapolate down.
And because it doesn't say that the second floor has to be, it does say total stories is 2, but other districts, obviously, you can go more than 2 stories. And actually, if there was usable space above, you would have floor up. Floors, I usually just say they're about. So
right.
If you have that, you end up with basically 8 feet from the top of this floor to the top of the next floor, minus the floor. So you got 7 feet there. So
Well,
which I think that probably might be an issue where it might need better clarification in the future, but
yeah,
given what we've got right now.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, this is one of those where it clear, like the proposal clearly does not meet the code, but the question is the code actually correct? And I think that the code probably does deserve some modification in the upper floor height standard in thinking about it, obviously. But then I also think that, overall, that because of the way it's defined, there's a little bit of flexibility in how we interpret it. So the fact that it doesn't actually go over the two combined. I mean, obviously, the intention of the 8-foot upper floor height was not to have 6'6" tall ceilings, right? It's the second floor. Right. That was not. Or if they were actually thinking, that it should be, floor height to ceiling on the second floor and just that didn't get translated through.
You're right, it's.
Yes. A little low.
Fine. From. Overall, 8 plus 12 is 20, you're within that, it's.
Yeah, same. If it was 12 and 12, it'd be a different scenario. I think we're proposing 12-foot tall ceilings on the second, pushing the total over. So
And I should say, planning board doesn't really get to enforce the rules they want or what you kind of have to enforce what the code says.
yes,
Obviously, when you find things that are unclear or contradictory, that the board then has to kind of decide what to do. So I want to be clear that if you are saying this, give a waiver on that. That it's not because you don't like the standard. That would not be a good. It's not really the reason that I don't think the board doesn't really have the power to pick and choose which one.
right.
But you're saying, this is reasonable and we can waive it. It's in keeping with the character and the intention of the code. Then I think we can move forward with that.
Well, technically, I don't think we're allowed to grant a waiver unless specifically authorized to do so. So I wouldn't use the
Yeah,
word
that's right.
waiver, but I would say that the flexibility of the way that the language is worded, it is unclear what the definition of total height means. And I think in this case, and moving forward, until we want to discuss a correction, if a correction is necessary, I think we're well within our rights if we choose to interpret this as being total height and not. Because what if it was reversed? What if the proposed floor heights were reversed for whatever reason? Let's just play it out. And we're talking about a proposal for 8-foot floor height on the first floor and 12 on the second floor. Would we be saying the same thing or different?
It's not clear, it doesn't very specifically. We have the power of interpretation. We interpret the way we're interpreting, which is total. It's acceptable. It doesn't change the character of the house from the outside. It's like instance there.
I would agree with that.
Delivery next time. 100%, which is why the discussion needs to be had when we bump into these things.
We put it on a future agenda meeting item to discuss whether it needs attention. Yeah, and I would do that. I would suggest it.
Okay, we can, I think maybe what we should do is revisit any kind of issues that we're making. Yeah, and we can go back. So yeah, so that's how we do a vote if that's how we want to do it. But
Sure.
May I ask one question? Just.
Yeah.
Clarify?
Go for it.
I certainly understand first floor height, upper floor height. I can't remember, is there a total building height requirement, limitation as well, or just?
There is, and I think it's 35 feet, but I'll have to find where exactly it says.
No, that's only in shoreline.
It's only in shoreline.
I'm 100%.
I'm gonna trust you. I know I didn't come across it in my
Yeah.
review, but
It's different because we do regulate by stories and we measure the stories from ground height to eave. It's different. As a matter of fact, the language somewhere in there does describe measuring from ground height to eave, which is further evidence, I think, for our interpretation of the total.
It makes-
So yeah, good question. But
It-
if you're
it-
out of shoreland, I don't think it doesn't, shoreland has its own.
Yeah.
regulations.
And not that it mattered. The reason I ask is my head's spinning on like, oh my gosh, how can we make this work with some sort of conditional thing to address whatever your concerns are? So I'm trying to work within parameters so anyway, that may be relevant later. We need to make some adjustments.
Okay. Right. Okay. Move on?
Yeah.
The design standards. We can get into, I guess this now. Windows and doors, the minimum maximum for the village residential is 20% minimum, 80% maximum. I'm assuming that we're all kind of on the same page about what that requirement, what that standard is, what it's regulating, you know. So for I'll tell you, when I went and did the math, and I should say, this is a conversation that Ben applicant and I have been going back and forth on. So I think that these numbers may not actually reflect exactly what's in here, but it's like, there's a couple windows that maybe need to add to get to this number that I think the conversation that we've had.
Oh my God, yeah, be more than willing to add it.
So I say that, and the way that I did it, I just looked at the entire first story that meets it exactly as what's in your packet here. It's basically 21%. The second story, this is where there may be a couple windows where it was just like, if you can kind of copy and paste this next to it, you get there. I think you do that like 2 times. So if that's the case, I should say that these numbers probably would need to, might need to be like a conditional approval. If the plans are adjusted, that's not really something that,
Yeah.
that's on me, because I should just say like, here's the application in front of you, here the numbers are, but we were going back and forth trying to get this there, so.
Can I ask a technical question? Is it the calculation for windows and doors? I should look it up. Does it actually say to do it by story, or does it say do it by facade?
It's by story, by facade.
By story, by facade. Okay, great.
And the way that it calculates it is the same way you measure building height. It's from the surface of this floor to, including either the floor above.
Mhm.
It's like those stories still, which is a little bit, it's not weird necessarily, but like that dead space where the floor is
Mhm.
still counts towards that total
Calculation.
So,
The only reason I ask is because you can imagine a scenario where, say, on the first floor, you have, a large bank of windows. That approaches 80%. But on the second floor, you have, 10%. Right? On the facade. And the average of the two obviously would be well within the total.
Right.
Fenestration.
Yeah.
So I wasn't sure of that.
yeah, let me see, there's probably.
I don't mean to completely put you on the
No,
spot.
no,
but
that's all right. It's
a
just, I
great
think
question.
there's, I'm sure I pulled all of the buildings. So it says the required window and door percentages apply to the total area of each store.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that.
I came across that. I thought that was relevant as well. So,
Yep, great.
Okay, so that is that. We'll come back to that. Like I mentioned before, architectural components like galleries and things have different standards, but well, like I said, we can come back to that when we can cross that bridge when we get to it. All right, so primary roofs, I only put in here kind of what's relevant. Gable roof is a permitted roof type, and a 5/12 slope is the minimum that you're allowed to have. The proposed is a gable roof with, there's two slopes, but both of them are steeper than what the minimum slope is required to be. It's basically the same thing for the accessory, although it's not clear whether accessory roof is for an accessory building or just an like a secondary roof type. This case, I just assumed it was secondary roof type. So you'll see that there are some like single story kind of components that are added on that have shed roofs, and the slopes there are greater than the minimum slope. So, so I think that those we can all kind of safely assume are meet the standard. The driveway, if you've read through this, you'll see there's not a whole lot. Driveways may pass through the front. Setbacks to get there. One driveway is permitted per building. There's only one proposed here. Has to comply with the roads, driveways, and entrances ordinance. So I copied some of those regulations in here because if it wasn't necessarily defined in the application, but I also think like all entrances shall be designed and constructed in accordance with the latest main DOT manual of standards and specifications. It's like, I don't know if we need to make that a condition of approval, but I put it in here so that it's like in whatever the document is, this gets approved. We give it to the applicant. It's like, it's in there. That's what we're saying you have to do. So there's all of those, and then moving on, vehicular parking from section 3, not relevant, not applicable, because there's less than 10 parking spaces being proposed. Section 4, bicycle parking, not relevant. Screening. Let's go to something that is particularly relevant. Lighting. This is something that, you know, the conversation that Ben, the applicant, and I had. The lighting that you had sent over, Ben, I think probably doesn't meet this. Does not meet these standards, and I don't know about the average lumens per square foot or levels measured at the front lot line. What's proposed are residential lighting fixtures, so you know you can kind of use that as you will. The thing that I kind of picked out on here is that outdoor lighting fixtures must be full cutoff or fully shielded to prevent light at or above horizontal. It's like, it's not a major thing. It's like fairly, you know, that can be, again, I think that is the kind of thing could be addressed as conditional. We can just say, no, you have to get lighting fixtures that meet this standard, and we'll be the judge.
Yeah, the town actually, excuse me, the CEO actually has a light meter.
So
It's designed, the standard is really designed so that you're not shedding light excessive light onto neighboring properties or the street and flooding it with a whole bunch of light unnecessarily, creating a nuisance.
I didn't, it's not really up to me, but I didn't want to, you know, kind of beat an applicant over the head with,
No.
especially one that's like trying to build a single family house.
Exactly.
Something like this that I think the CEO can.
No, I think the
address.
sections you included here
Go ahead.
are great. That way they're in there just so that they're known, but you're right,
Yeah.
it is just a standard residential house.
So
We're
I
not
think-
talking about a business or a sign or anything.
Yeah. All right. So then building standards, this I think is probably where we might have most of our conversation. Okay. I'm just skimming this because. So all of this, these standards are relevant. The main building mass, this is probably almost word for word what we already reviewed.
So maybe we should go back and look at your memo
Yep.
and talk about massing. That is one of the,
That's a just look.
Crux of the
Okay,
issue.
so that's basically that first part that we're looking at here, whether it meets the standards of section 3.
so I actually think that you mind if I jump in? real quick?
No, it's your
Sorry.
meeting.
Does anyone else have anything they want to jump in on? I actually think the two of the questions are actually sort of combined into how we sort of understand this, because the question is whether or not, so if you look at in the memo diagram A, which is the rectangle with regular gable roof on it, and then diagram B looks more like the picture on the front of the this packet here, where we've got the two side front things jutting out. I don't know what to call them at the moment, masses. So the question is that the mass or is that the mass? I think that is also tied into the question of, if you go down to diagram D, how do you think about the yellow in the front in between the two masses, right? And that goes to the conversation, I think, about how do we classify that component and whether it's integral or not, right?
Yeah.
And maybe we actually start the conversation there
Well,
or not,
I was thinking that this probably is
is the key.
beginning point. Because everything gets added onto that essentially.
Oh, that's true.
So it's, you know, when I first was looking at this, I was not sure. I very much was like, which one of these? In my head, I've got, think which way I think, but it's not up to me. It's up to you.
Right.
So, like I said, that there are those 3 kind of standards, or I guess there's actually 4, because the second one is a combination of the 2. But it is the main building mass with a rectangular form. The outer wall of the main building mass must be located on a single plane. Deviations are allowed through articulations, but those articulations also, they're not limitless. I think you're allowed to cut away space within the boundaries of the roof or main building, provided that the eaves and ridge beam of the roof are not affected. So I think that's a very important part, is the eaves. And for the purpose of measurement, well, we can
We can get into that.
that's
So
one
it's really
step.
just the mass. And so I think what we're looking at is whether or not the 2 front masses on the right and the left are considered front massing components individually, or are they considered part of the main mass of the building? Correct?
Yes. Yeah, it is. It's like, is it A or is it B? Which one of these do we think is the main mass?
All right. So the definition for a front or side expansion is a single or multi-story extension from the sidewalls of a primary building or accessory building. Front, this is on page, I'm sorry. Should have said that. This is on page 58, top of the page on the left under massing components. Item 4, subsection C. And under standards, it says the front or side expansion may not encroach on setbacks. Primary building may only have 1 front side expansion per side. Front side expansion may be centered or offset at the sidewall of the primary building, provided they share at least 6 feet with the common wall. Front side expansion may only attach to a primary or accessory building, though other components may attach to it. Front side expansion may be used for vehicular parking, provided garage doors. And then it has standards for dimensional standards.
Force. Underside expansion.
Front or side expansion. So the question is, can I gotta flip back to can we consider that the main mass, or do we consider just the rectangle box with the gable on it, the main mass? I'll be honest with you, I can't really see an argument, a legitimate interpretation where those aren't front expansions. I think that the language of the code is very clear that what we're talking about is a rectangle onto which you then add things. And it is very clear that it says only one front side expansion per side. So if we go down that road of thinking about it, let's contrast that with the other in just a second. It would not work. What's the consideration or what's the possibility of considering those part of the primary mass, considering the fact that we're talking about single ridge beam and a single rectangle? I don't see that argument, and I'm not sure how to get there. Does anyone have anything that they want to say about this?
May I make a suggestion, or do you guys want to talk it through? Is it,
Let's see if anyone on the board wants to
Okay,
weigh in real
I
quick.
don't know what the pursuit, so please.
That's
help me.
okay. I usually try to let members
Understood.
while we're doing the actual review weigh in first. But if nobody has anything they want to say,
I mean, that was, yeah, my conclusion, that it seems very explicit saying it's a rectangle. And that there's clearly, you can imagine this as the primary building, and then over time,
Mm.
things are added to it. But it seems like it does explicitly say that the primary building is a rectangular form. And that the outer walls in a single plane, I don't see argue that is not multiple parts.
so the only argument that I had, and this is why I wondered if the possible interpretation might be that if you considered the front of those masses, those front, a single facade, and that the whatever we call the space in between, the porch or the gallery or whatever we determine that is, has cookie cuttered piece out of it. Would be the only way I think that could be determined. But I still don't see how you get around the argument that it's a rectangular form with a ridge beam
So also,
or a
just,
single roof height. Oh, sorry.
I think that this other section is also, because I try to like look at it any way. When I approach this, I'm like, how can this work under the code?
Yeah.
But so this section 3C6, integral components may be used to cut away space within the boundaries of the roof or main building, provided that the eaves and the ridge beam of the roof are not affected. And so my thinking on that is you still would have two single slopes cut into it. That eave would still be straight.
Continuous.
I don't know. I don't
Can you
know if
read that
that's-
one more time? Just,
Sure.
I'm gonna close my eyes.
It says integral components may be used to cut away space within the boundaries of the roof or main building mass, provided that the eaves and ridge beam of the roof are not affected.
Interesting.
Here it may make sense to read the definition of stoop.
So stoop is an architectural component. Right, page 59.
So the definition of a stoop is a component type featuring set of stairs with a landing leading to the entrance of a building. And then I'm imagining you, because further down it says for standards, stoops may be recessed into the building facade. Stoops may be perpendicular or parallel. Recessed stoop must not be enclosed. So
Okay, but when you get to table 5.8, stoop dimensions, width 3 feet 6 inches, projection 3 foot 6 inches. I think that is actually what differentiates a stoop from a porch or a gallery.
So believe that those are minimum.
3'6" minimum porch.
But I,
Base. Projection, 6 foot minimum, 4 foot max. Where are you saying that? Where? Oh, porch? Oh, gallery, I'm sorry. I'm not sure that gallery fits. A raised roof platform, sorry. A raised roofed platform that provides additional living space with access solely from the interior of the building. So that does not apply. We can do that. Porch definition, a raised platform with stairs that provide access to a building entrance. Porches may be partially or closed. So, all right, let's run that scenario down. If we consider a stoop, the front part between the two, in the middle, front door is, call it a stoop, a component type featuring a set of stairs with a landing leading to the entrance of the building. Recessed stoop may not be stoops. Does that actually fit all the other standards? That's a question.
I think that I just kind of keep coming back to this integral components may be used to cut away space within the boundaries of the roof. Provided the eaves and the ridge beam, and the ridge beam is, there's no question that's not affected, but I do think that eaves, provided that the eaves are not affected. I can, you've seen plenty of buildings with stoops where it's like stoop is inset, the front door is behind the front facade. Then the second story comes back out and it's all flat. Because the roof still is at that front facade. And that's, as I read this, like, that's what I think the intention or what it's getting, but I don't know.
Yeah, so what comes to mind is, I don't know if everyone can remember this or think about it, I just drive it all the time. When you drive through Wisconsin from up the road, straight from Ready to it's before you look like straight at the courthouse, right? And it has this beautiful brickwork, all brick, right? And it has an arched, the front door is set back and it's an arch thing, and the brickwork is actually molded back arch. It's like literally someone scooped it out. It's beautiful. That's what comes to mind. And I only say that to provide some sort of visual context to what we're talking about. And that would fit with the definition that you're describing, where it's a scoop out of the mass that doesn't interrupt. Like if it went all the way up and that scoop took out the roof, the eave and part of the roof,
Right.
Then it's not a stoop anymore.
There's a whole series, many of the houses on Little Street have front door is set back in. 2 feet.
Yes. Right.
And it's thought of it as a stoop, but yeah, there's a few steps, there's a landing, there's the door, maybe there's side lights, but it's in the first floor.
And a lot of them have like a little
Some of them have a little roof open,
roof.
not all. But you're like, yeah, it doesn't break the front of the second.
And I think that it doesn't say one way or the other, so it seems like it is entirely possible you could break that second floor too,
As long as it doesn't break the eaves.
is what I'm seeing from this one section that mentions not affecting.
But again, I keep coming back to the fact that like, the eaves would be like 4 eaves going this way along the front instead of like,
Oh,
If those
that's
two,
the definition of an eve.
isn't it?
I think
Where-
that's
where the wall meets the roof. Am I wrong?
no, I mean, yeah, that's the eaves. But you're saying that in this case, the eaves go back. Up.
Well, I mean, yeah, so if we're looking at item, I'm sorry, in the memo, right, it's A or B. The eve is not, I mean, it's not continuous, right? So there's either 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Oh, you're saying, I see. Yeah. Yeah, they're all right. There's 4.
If B is the main building. That's-
If B is the main building.
And I don't know if this helps at all, but the definition of eve here is the soffit resulting from the junction of a building wall and an overhanging roof. Which I think probably wrong. Is what you were imagining.
Okay. Does anyone else have anything that they wanna weigh in about how we're thinking about this? Main building mass versus massing components?
No, set precedent. Think of the applicant.
Not an application. Not an application. I did because I was very curious about mass and form and everything. I took it upon myself. I drove all the streets in D2, 3, 4, and 5 to see if there was, sorry, am I not, you're not hearing me?
No, you're good.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Just to see if there was other, examples of this in our like housing stock, our built environment, because the core zoning code and its predecessor, the character code, was crafted based on the standards were created based on going around to our neighborhoods and measuring things and looking at how things were built historically and so these massing components and these architectural components they're ours, you know what I mean? They are supposed to be as representative as possible. You're not going to get 100% ever. But it tried to capture the majority of what the character of our different districts are, and then apply those appropriately based on historical trends. That was the whole sort of shoot match, right, with this code. So unfortunately, I only found one other example of where we've got the 2 front with the front door in the middle. And that was in D2, in the back of Timber Lane. And so I only found that one other house. Now, granted, I didn't see all the houses, but I drove all the streets slowly and looked around, tried to understand massing from the perspective of like when you're gonna attach a mass to the front sides of a building. And how to understand it, just to make sure that everything was being represented accurately. So I found one example. So I don't want to. I don't think that sets a precedent. I don't think that does not set a precedent. I just think that what it does is it highlights the fact that one I think does not. You don't write a code for one thing. Try to capture the majority of how things work. So I think what we should do is, sorry to set it past 7:30. Let's move on. Let's put a pin in this. Let's move on to the other questions. We'll come back and we'll talk about possible ways to address it. At the moment, I'm inclined to not vote on it yet, but I'm strongly inclined to say that the main building mass is a rectangular. It doesn't include the front masses, but we'll all vote on it.
I'm also very aware that there can be time constraints to these meetings. I've come with, if that's your finding, I hope it's not, it's to my benefit to have the main mass be those protrusions. I can submit my reasons why I think, but I know it's your call. I have alternatives where I address those concerns that I'd very much like to discuss today to keep the project on track. I just want to keep an eye on time. I know that this wraps up by 8:30. If
Let's hold that. That's great. If you've got ideas for alternatives, let's hold that. Let's go through the rest of it.
Okay.
And we'll come back.
I just don't want to run out of
That's
time.
fine. We're not
and
gonna run out
I
of
want to do everything I can.
We will
to
get
this.
it. We will have all the topics.
Okay, all right, thank you.
All right, so the next thing on this, in this draft finding of facts is height, which I think we've already addressed. We don't need to talk about one. The next one is materials, which I know I put in here, I mentioned that the document that the renderings have, I think there's too many materials on there. I've talked with Ben, and even when he gave me that, he was like, this is not exactly what I am thinking. I put this in here to say, make sure that rendering, it's clear that there are too many materials on there. I think the applicant knows that. And again, that's, I don't think what he is even really wants to propose, but again, we can kind of make sure that we nail that in, or nail that down in conditional, condition on approval.
Yeah.
If you're. All right, so additional structures, there are not any temporary structures, there are not any primary entrances. There's some discussion on this, but I will just say that the front door faces and is parallel to the front property line, so I think that just reading this, so I think that standard is met. The side door potentially could be a front door as well, which is allowed on the side, but it kind of depends how you want to measure. It actually comes back to the main massing question. So, but either way, there is at least one front door that faces as parallel to the street. So, shop front's not applicable. All right, the next applicable thing is design standards. Okay, this is where we get back into whether those two things on the front are part of the main mass or additions.
Right.
So I think maybe what might be more relevant is if we talk about the other parts of the house.
Yeah.
So assuming that we resolve the issue with the two kind of front gable parts, you also, let me see, front and side expansions, a single story expansion from the side walls. Okay, it's basically the same standard for the rear. That's the number of rear expansions of the primary building to 1.
Right.
Can I ask a clarifying question here? If I look at page 56 of the code, there's a table 5.1 that says design standards by district.
You
Or
said-
zoning,
Which page
What
were you
page
talking
you
about?
want?
I'm on page 56 of
Six.
the zoning code. I'm not sure I'm interpreting this correctly, but what this seems to imply to me is that massing and architectural components are not a design standard limitation for the rear of the house in zone D4.
What this is actually saying is that in D4, the rear, which has a rear of the building, has a dot under additions.
Uh-huh.
The standards in additions are what governs. On the front and on the side, massing components and architectural components govern.
Mm, mhm, mhm.
So are we, I guess my question is, are we talking about problems with massing or architectural components in the rear of the house? But instead, the additions design standards should apply, to which I think there's no concern.
I agree. That is correct.
Yeah, so
So
there is an
that-
addition. And
Yeah.
that, so I think that rear part is an addition.
Yeah, I would say that's in this, because in other districts, like say historic, right?
Oh, yeah, sure. Don't do
Um,
anything to any of it. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I believe that that's
Okay.
correct. So, and the standards for additions are much more general. Basically, the addition can't be taller or wider or deeper than the building to which it is attached.
Do what you
Other
want,
than
just don't
that-
let me see it from front.
Other than that, it can be literally the same size as the building to which it is attached. Don't know if there's a setback. No, there isn't even a setback.
So I don't know if that helps streamline some of the rear of the building.
I think it probably
Concerns.
does. I think it probably does. That was actually something that I was not clear on was how additions, what exactly additions were.
Yeah.
Are they components, which they
Additions
but they
are-
separate. I think it's the
They
third
are,
time.
they're components. No, they're not components. I'm sorry. They're not components.
Right.
They are standards for the general, it actually says it, right? Provide a basic framework for the regulation of generic additions to buildings.
Yeah.
So it's even more general than massing components.
Right.
And massing components are more general than architectural.
Yeah, oh, definitely.
Right.
An architectural for sure.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so I think that is good.
Yeah, I think the
Actually.
fact is good. I think the question really is, it goes back to probably what prompted us to review this, which is the width, right? So looking at the front facade, the front elevation, no matter how we determine what the main mass of the building is, the main mass of the building is definitely less than 50 feet wide.
Mhm.
And then we've got these, looking at, on the first floor, we've got these bump outs. How do we classify those?
I will say I did not see any reason why they couldn't be classified as massing. components. But
Oh, I
So-
completely agree, actually. I think those clearly are massing components. On both sides. And so I don't know if we consider, especially the one on the left-hand side, what elevation is that? The east elevation or
south,
the south
is-
elevation? Because the standards for fenestration on massing components is less
Right.
than on architectural components.
Yeah.
So it's only 20%. It would mean that like the number of windows that you'd have to add to the first floor of that massing component to get it to the 20% would be far less than if we considered an architectural component like a enclosed gallery,
Yeah.
which I don't think it meets the standard of. I think it clearly is massing component. I think the right-hand side, excuse me, is also clearly a massing component when viewed from the front elevation.
that's, so when I put this together, and that's good because actually that means that the first or the second. Yeah, so that the window and door requirement for 20%, that's applied throughout, then I think more or less the windows close to how they are meets that standard. The proposal as it is, I doesn't get close to 60% minimum windows and doors on those first story things,
If it was considered
which if it
architectural.
was considered any of those architectural.
Right.
So that's good. So there's a couple of dominoes that,
Yeah,
are-
I mean, I'm not looking at the actual. Well, your numbers actually ran it, right? Your numbers were inclusive
the whole, it was the
of,
whole,
of all. But is it, okay, so here's another question. Windows and doors, you said it's each story, each facade.
well, let me see.
Is it each story, each facade, or is it each story cumulative? And I think it's facade. So each, you look at the front facade, first story, you'd add up the amount of windows and the square footage, and you'd subtract and find out if it makes 20%.
It says the required window and door percentages apply to the total area of each story.
Of each building facade,
Does it say of each building facade?
of
No, they
each
leave that
story of each building facade as measured from the surface of the floor of that story to the surface of the next floor above.
Wait, where are you reading?
Page 63, window and door.
And what were you reading from?
I was reading from my,
Memo.
it was the same section, but I
the
cut it off.
Paraphrasing.
Okay. So you're agreeing with my understanding?
Each story of each facade. So it suggests to me that when you look at the south side, you've got the end, you've got 1, 2, I'm not sure you have.
You would take each story.
On the first floor, I think there are 2 facades, or 3 facades. There's 2 planes. No, yeah, there's 2 facades.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah,
So,
each story,
yeah.
each facade.
Right. There's on this side, there's a facade here and there's
Oh.
a facade.
Correct. Yeah. That's good.
Here.
That actually
Which-
tracks with, massing components having their own standards. So if we consider the south
Right,
elevation, we consider this bump out of it. We're looking at it from the front facade, right?
right.
When we see this here, we call that a massing component. Then when you turn and you look this direction, that's a facade and that's.
Right.
I agree. Does that make sense?
It does. Does, and that's
So that window percentage is per facade.
per story
facade.
per facade.
Per
The
story.
total area of each story of each facade.
But that being
So-
said, if it's a massing component, it's only 20%.
Yeah.
Right. So on the facade that is the
So
south most component, massing component. There's only one window currently
You're talking about the 1 story.
on the
One-
single, on the
Single
ground
story,
floor,
yeah.
yeah. And so to get to 20%, you add, two, 3 more windows, and you're there.
Mhm.
And the same would be true, I don't actually know what the calculation is for the facade in front, but it might actually work. Right?
and it's just per floor. So
Just for floor.
the first floor, the one facade sort of wraps around, but the first floor of that facade is almost all window.
What now?
If talking about this floor, that facade is,
Oh, that's
One area.
20%, sure, that's one area.
that's one area.
But the
That's
second
not.
floor facade only has one window in each of the facades on the second floor, and the left one may comply, but the right one doesn't. So adding a couple of windows on the ground floor massing component, adding a couple of windows upstairs, southernmost facade gets you there. Am I right about this?
I think so. What I wanted to clarify is when we're looking at this, are we pulling everything to be 2-dimensional, or are we saying each plane basically is its own? That each one of those has to be 20%. Or is it the,
Definition for facade.
Well, I believe Kevin's interpretation is correct because it combines the two things that are in the code, right? Which is that massing components have their own standards, and we know this because massing components carry windows and door standards, minimum 20%, maximum 80%.
Hmm.
If it didn't have that standard, we could treat the whole elevation as one flat plane.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think that does make sense. And so basically means almost like every facet
Every
needs to,
whether it's inside or from the actual, you can't just flatten the page and go do. You have to say, this is a massing component. What's the square footage of that? What's the square footage of the windows? Is that 20%? This is a Another, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Makes my job a little bit more complicated, but that's
It
totally
does.
fine.
I am
That's
sorry.
not- No, that's
More
not a
math.
reason to not see it that way.
Does anyone have a alternative view or a different understanding? All right. I think there's general consensus that those are massive components, and the width issue, the total width of the building is a non-issue at this time, based on the fact that the main mass of the building is not over 50.
Yeah, the width of, it doesn't matter how it sounds like, right? We're considering the two options for main mass are both the same.
Right.
Okay, so that's.
Where are we at, lost it?
Architectural components, but I don't think, so we're not using architectural components on this, maybe the porch in the front. But it's a stoop, porch, yeah. It's a stoop. That works. Stoop is defined. Yeah. So we're gonna say. There's a stoop. Alright. Yes. Okay, for roofs, I think the only thing was that as a roof converges to a single ridge beam at its highest point, the highest point of any component is lower than the highest point of the roof of the primary building. And the roofs are proposed to be clad with all of all the peaks are lower than that main.
Right.
Windows and doors. Use standards. Okay. Oh, that actually gets pretty close to the end. The last thing is C Street.
Yep.
Which I think is what kind of brought this to us.
Yeah, no, that was, I mean, it was good to include that, even though we know
Yeah.
that, you know, the rights have terminated and C Street doesn't exist. It's good to have it in the conclusions. Just so
Yeah,
that
no,
it
I
is
want to
spelled
make
out.
sure that I kept that in there.
Absolutely.
because
Yeah, I agree.
Even though we hashed it out.
Yeah.
Well, and you all saw the email, I guess, from you, who I think made it pretty.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. This is one of those things where I understand the CEO was nervous, and rightly so, that's his job. And the CEO and the town should always do their best to exercise all the due diligence, before signing something that may not be legal.
Right.
So that was good. Hey, we did good. So I think at the moment, and correct me if I'm wrong, we've managed to identify only two persistent issues with the application as presented. If we
least that I know.
were, and we'll vote on this, but if we classify the two front protrusions as massing components, that's issue number one. Issue number two is the amount of windows and doors, specifically on the south sides.
And I should probably, I can check all of them to make sure that they comply, but I don't.
Well, the north is not a problem, obviously.
Well, the only thing is garage doors don't.
Windows in
Unless
the garage doors, do,
window, well, I think it has to be all glass.
not the garage, not the whole garage.
Let me see, because there is something about garage doors. Let's see where it was.
Most of the facade is garage door. There isn't much room left for windows.
Right, no, yeah.
Garage doors don't count towards fenestration total.
I think it might be actually in the definition of garage.
Window
But let me just find it, because if I'm making it up, then I want to make sure that that's the case. Let me see, garage, okay. Garage doors. No, no, no.
Real quick.
So Michael, I don't know if it helps you on.
Windows and doors.
On page 104. There are two definitions, windows and doors, but then also windows and doors ground story, which the garage would be on the ground story. It says the percentage of openings.
I think that, I don't,
I
I
would
don't
think-
think you have to have a window in a door for it to count. That's part of that percentage. It's,
Yeah, my read on that is since it's a garage door on the ground story, the opening itself counts as a door since it's on the ground. Obviously, I'm not the one that interprets, I'm just raising it here and kind of wondering out loud how you can possibly get to that minimum.
Right.
If a garage door is counted as one.
Yeah, page 104 says if a garage door is more than 50% glass, it's counted as a window and a door. But it's unlikely that it's going to be more than 50%.
Yeah, I haven't seen many of those. And then, so it's the next section down that gives me some hope here, that the windows and doors ground story clarifies that, hey, unless we're talking about the ground floor here, if we're talking about the ground floor, then it's the opening.
Yeah. So that this is what and we can talk about, it says when the definition of windows and doors, maybe not the best place for this, but the arrangement, proportioning and design of openings on every exterior wall of a building, including windows and doors, but excluding entrances and doors for parking, loading, and service facilities. If a garage door is more than 50% glass, it is counted as a window and door.
Where's that?
Page 104 on the code.
104. Do we have, I was trying to listen in. Do we have conflicting standards? Is that what's happening?
I don't know if it's conflicting. It's just whether or not the issue of like garage door.
Is it the opening or is it the door itself with glass?
and does it count if there isn't any glass?
Right,
Guess
that's
that's the question.
I'll be honest with you. I always interpreted garage doors as doors.
Yeah.
No, it's clear cut out in a otherwise flat surface.
Hmm.
Where were we reading? The definition of what now?
Windows and doors on page 104.
And where was the other standard we were talking about? Windows and door grounds. Percentage of openings present along the building's ground floor.
Which is what you were saying. Garage door is a door. On the ground floor.
I don't honestly see a problem with that. I think that's that's really nitpicking. You know, a garage door is a door. It's an opening.
I mean, you can easily have a wall with a big garage door and 80% of the wall.
Easily.
You can't then require that there,
You could put a window.
You put
you have
20%
to have
glass in it.
you have to have 20% glass.
I agree. I agree.
I don't think.
It doesn't work. And I think, windows and doors, the definition of windows and doors is general, but the definition of windows and doors ground story is specific. I'm good with that. All right. So how do we get there? We were talking about percentage of windows. and doors.
Question of
Okay.
percentage of.
So was I correct in my assessment that we have just the two issues to talk about? Excuse me. So now the question really is there some path forward for the application by applying conditions of approval to move forward, or do we need to deny the application and excuse me, and have it come back with a new design? That's the question. And I guess you've come prepared with ideas. Do you want to share some of those with us? Because
I have, so so there's two issues, the windows and the massing, right?
at the moment, I believe we've
Okay.
resolved everything. else.
Window.
And the windows, as I've said to Michael, like, we actually already want to add more windows to that south facade. In going back and forth on whether it was a gallery, we kind of fell in love with the idea of having a lot of upper windows above the countertops anyway to let some sun in. So what I would say is I'm all yours. I'll work with you. I'll work with George. I'll work with anybody to put windows wherever they need to go. That seems very, very resolvable.
Yeah,
With the
well, and we've
conditional-
already gotten to 20% for the whole floor, but I think we can probably get.
I'm
to
saying
the-
it. Sure. So please know I'm willing to work with you on it. Has it been determined by the planning board that the front facade of those gables, that does not count toward the mass? 'Cause what I would maintain is that the main mass is this second picture, and that the central part is a stoop, which you mentioned, Ben, earlier, the general versus the specific definition, and the specific definition of a stoop seems to indicate that it's okay to cut into the front facade and to cut into the roof.
Well, I think that's the central issue is that I believe the standard is that it's not okay to cut into the roof with the heat. And so, no, we haven't voted on that
Oh, okay.
yet, but I think the general consensus from what I was understanding during the conversation was that those two front protrusions are in fact massing components on the front. And therein lies the problem. How do we address that?
Okay. All right. So now's the part where I present proposals in
So-
case you don't agree that that can be main mass, or how's it work?
So generally speaking, we don't spitball. So, and what I mean by that is, our job, our duty as a planning board is to review the application as presented. We're really not supposed to engage in like, the back and forth, like, well, if you change this, blah, blah, blah. We can apply conditions of approval.
Uh-huh.
So we can say, yes, adding more windows is a de minimis change to get you to the standard.
Mhm.
But massing components is not de minimis. And so how would we, without something to actually review,
Mhm.
how would we pass approval of that? So there are a couple of options. If you have ideas for ways that it can be resolved, we can table this and you can come back with a different design that meets the code. And we can review those changes, because that would be the only part that we would need to review. It would take a lot less time. Because we wouldn't have to review the entire application.
Sure,
We
yeah.
wouldn't have to reject it. See what I'm saying? We could table it, you could amend it, we could come back. There's a process for that. But we couldn't sit here and just like draw on a piece of paper and say, okay, you're gonna be good, we'll pass it. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to revisit. What I'm interested in is the timeline of digging.
Yeah.
So I think that what I have to propose is plainly and easily achievable. And that this planning board could see that this alteration of the house presents no problem at all to the buildability, the feasibility of meeting everything that we discussed. Nor does it mean I have to call my excavator and say, you got to dig differently, or the foundation guy and say, you got to dig.
So what are you thinking?
So I printed out a few options, but then this one didn't. Print. I'm fine presenting you multiple options. I think the one that didn't print is the most likely to meet what you guys are.
Right over there.
Essentially, I called this the make it a box. Right? It seems like what the planning board is saying, if you like box.
We're saying that the code says.
I don't,
that-
I understand, it's not, the code is saying, look, I want it to be right. Right? So what this would do is essentially fill in spacing what are currently proposed as those roads. chop off the gables, create a single front
I see.
roof.
So would the front porch in that one still be inset?
It's a stoop, but yes.
It would, okay.
And in that
Yeah.
case, the definition of stoop saying,
Applies.
look, the
Yeah.
eaves, they don't,
Because
it's
the,
allowed to be inside.
the second story is even with the,
That's,
that's correct.
and that looking down on this now, it would be a rectangular roof
So
with the garage sticking out the back.
The back,
where-
yeah.
Yeah.
where's, is the ridge? The ridge isn't still here then.
Yeah, but it would soon be moved in.
It's pulled forward a little bit.
The
The
ridge is,
slope of the roof must be changed as well. I would
so
say.
you've got to
Yeah.
reduce the slope
Well,
unless the
actually
ridge
why
is
I
higher.
asked the question. That's why it's the overall height of the house as well, is that if the height is the 12 plus the 8, right? And this requires that that roof go up a bit more before going down. Which one? I don't see that that's in violation of the code.
Doesn't matter. The only standard there is that the pitch of the roof doesn't go below the minimum.
Right, which right now it's 7/12, 5/12 is the minimum, so
Correct.
even that, I have something to play with.
Yeah, exactly.
So that should be fine.
Yeah.
The beauty of this is, it's the same exact.
Yeah.
I do it incur some cost of re-engineering. but it's minimal.
Yeah, yeah.
And I can call up Hammond and say, look, we gotta fill this in.
Yeah.
I mean, I certainly think that's one way to do it. Another possibility, plenty of examples of which I saw in my little drive was, where you have the front eave was lower, basically, than what
Yes.
you've got it. And the gables, are just even with the front side of the house.
I don't know if this is what you're describing, but this is actually something that I would prefer. Look particularly at the second page of this. And what this gives is something.
Could I have a
more like-
copy of that?
Oh, that's right. So what this gives is the rectangle. Right, code clearly likes rectangles. On the second page, that roof is largely rectangular. Right, now, the only difference here, that roof line extends all the way to the very front of those masses.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Making an unbroken line from left to right across that facade.
Meaning the second floor would be 3 dormers.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I haven't reviewed it. But I would think that would meet that would potentially meet the code.
What, right, my interpretation of this is that the eave of the roof in this one is undisturbed by that stoop. Because the eave of the roof is coming all the way down to the
Yep.
very front. So,
That's a minimal change. But it does change the massing.
So your massing becomes architectural components.
Yeah,
You've
it switches
converted them into
the 2
dormers.
protrusions in the front, on the right and the left, to basically the, does that work?
They turn into.
I think so. It raises the question of like, now, what's a gable?
yeah, so the dormer, or are you talking about
Or
the middle-
dormer.
the middle one or the?
No, well, I mean, yeah, it's just how do we
I would think about this.
define that? Which is, like, I think that it does solve that main massing thing. It's just.
So, I mean, this is where we get a little like iffy, and we can talk about conditions and timing and everything in a minute. But I just have to preface whatever spitball conversation we're gonna have right now, and this is great. Thank you for doing it. But we can't sign off on it without an actual review. So there's gonna be a time lag. The question is, how do we handle it? So that's a separate conversation. So I know we're getting close, but we still got time. So I'm happy to have this spitball conversation, but understand that it does not represent an actual review. Does that make sense?
So.
We can all come to a general consensus. You can modify your application, resubmit it, they'll get reviewed. We'll talk about timing in a minute.
Okay.
So let me just go and look at architectural components for the purposes of this. We'll give you some good direction. Let's start there. Because you've done some great work here, and I wanted to make sure that we don't send you down a path where you're not going to be able to get approved. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So these are dormers on a cross gable. Yep, shed or roof that projects vertically from the roof. Space within the roof. Dormer. Yeah. Oh, okay.
So what is the inset at the front door from that facade? If you have that front facade all the way across, it's the inset to the front door.
It would be a stoop,
How deep would it?
7 feet.
I'm not sure that a dormer would work. There's a couple of standards. Total width of a dormer must be known as H2B. Total width of a dormer window must be no more than 18 inches wider than the rough opening required for its windows.
And cross gable,
Gable or gambrel roof, perpendicular roof, tranquilly increased. Network. Maximum stock supported by two cross cables, maybe used together. Width equals to the width of the narrowest space. Works. Rigid beam with a cross cable must not be higher than the rigid beam of the primary building. That works. Yeah, that works. Windows and doors, 20 minimum.
cross gable,
Cross gable. Those would be
those two.
two cross gables and a dormer.
And that one would be a dormer window or shed
Yeah.
dormer or no.
It's
a regular dormer.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, actually, that would probably work. And again, the picture you showed us on the laptop
Yes,
also is.
my sense on the picture that I showed on the laptop is, and of course, I'm not in your guys' chairs. The picture I showed on the laptop feels like slam dunk. It's a box. You're allowed to have a stoop. My understanding, you're allowed to have a stoop.
Right.
We've already determined the massing components on the side aren't an issue and the rear isn't an issue.
Right.
This feels like the safest way for me to proceed with something that my read and from what I've heard today seems like it would not run afoul of any. My sense of this, it gets a little fancy. You start introducing, how is that dormer doing right there? And what do we consider that space between the dormer and the cross gables? And how do we feel about that?
Right.
This may be possible and I slightly prefer it.
Yeah.
This feels to me safe.
Yeah.
Either of them require the same backhoe.
Footprint.
The foundation's the same.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, right.
So-
exactly.
We got 15 minutes left. What I'd like to talk about now is sort of timing. So these are wonderful. And I'd like to make a proposal. Two parts. One, I think you've shown great initiative and willingness to help get the project to meet the standards of the code. And I want to congratulate you on that for all the work you've done. Thank you very much. So I think what I'd like to propose is that we don't approve or deny the application right now. We table it. We ask the town planner and the applicant to decide which of these scenarios you actually want to propose as the amendment to the application. And the town planner can advise you about this one, if this is the one you really want to pursue and whether he thinks it can meet the code, and or that one. Amend the application, and I would propose we have an emergency meeting of the planning board in 2 weeks, which gives you enough time to redraw the windows in the south elevation, get the actual application the way that you want it, with the help of the town planner. And the only thing that I would add to that is that I guess well, I don't know. I would take advice from you on this.
On what specifically?
Well, if you really want to break ground and the changes we're talking about to make it don't change the actual footprint of the lot, is there a way we can conditionally approve it or not? I mean, can we conditionally approve just the site work and say that the rest of it has to come back for review since we're not actually changing the footprint? It's like a two-part process.
Yeah,
Two-part
right,
review, which is
right.
weird.
So I'll let you decide. The issues that I see with doing conditional approvals is like, what's the recourse if things don't go the way that they're supposed to?
Correct.
And that's, not to say that I think that that's gonna,
Absolutely not, but it's got to
You
be
know,
the same for everyone.
but it's like, yeah, so I think that because really the planning board, like the next step is you issue a building permit. Really, then it's like kind of on the code enforcement officer's desk, planning board's
Yeah.
done.
Right.
It's easy enough to kind of say, all right, well, just make sure the windows are in the right place. And then like I can talk with the code enforcement officer and be like, yes, you can issue the building permit then. But like, once you kind of let that cat out of the bag, it's out of the bag. But it's all about what you guys are comfortable with, because I'll do, however that works, but I just know like those are like the checks.
And that makes
So-
sense. I don't disagree with you.
I would be more than willing to put the safe house in the record. I'll email it to you. For a conditional approval that says, hey, code enforcement officer. Who, in my view, does have the authority to sign off. Hey, code enforcement, it's gotta look like this. It cannot look like what he proposed. And that with what's described here and what we've talked through today, that I hope gives you enough detail to conditionally approve the foundation.
I would agree with that simply because the applicant has been transparent, has walked us through the process. You're obviously not going to leave the state or something that work lined up. I normally wouldn't go that route, but I do feel like the case is pretty compelling. Just say we can get some approval for the first steps back, and that's what I lean on this, but that's just my.
What about setting the precedent for down the line where we could say that gave him conditional approval on this, put a different angle on that? It just makes it a little problematic. I agree with everything you've said. Just worry about that precedent.
I'm personally,
No.
I'm more inclined to suggest that in light of the amount of work the applicant's done to try and resolve this pre-meeting, even though it didn't make it into the official application, the normal path would be, look, it's not in the application. We have to have an actual completed application that the planner deems completed. That's the process. And so to modify it on the fly actually breaks the code. And we're not technically allowed to do that. We can't waive that. That's not a condition we can waive. I'd be more inclined to say, let's hold an emergency meeting, try and get this wrapped up as soon as possible.
How long, what is the shortest space of time that you need to redo the application for us to schedule an emergency? Pick a facade. Get the plans together. Resubmit. What is the shortest amount of time you can do that? You think?
In all honesty, come on.
So if we make an emergency meeting for next Thursday, it gives you a week. I mean, tomorrow, in a perfect world, is a great idea.
I know it's probably, yeah, obviously I've been in touch with Michael. He's expecting to hear from me and he has contractors that are lined up. I guess I can't answer the question right now. As you guys know, the roads just came unposted. Every contractor in Maine has their schedule filled. We're penciled in. We've already been keeping them waiting, knowing that this meeting is happening for something that we thought, hey, as soon as the roads are unposted, you're gonna be digging, and they're calling us like the road's been unposted for, so. I can't sit here and tell you that we don't lose our excavation guy. We don't lose our foundation guy. By Thursday. Maybe we can sweet talk him, maybe not, but I don't know. And that's why I'm pushing as hard as I am for conditional approval. Tried really, really hard here to get something that would work, that would meet code. And I guess it's the least amount of harm to me to get going on the project in recognition of thinking that this project was in a good place and that the appropriate authorities had already weighed in. I completely understand where you guys are at. It must be frustrating to have an applicant think like, why aren't you for like this? Had I known that the code enforcement officer wasn't the person that was going to be ultimately making the decision, I certainly would have approached this differently, and in hindsight, would have given you guys more time. I assumed that him saying yes meant yes, and that I could start the process. And I would say that's a big reason that we're here, and I've taken a lot of the initiative to try to make up for that fact. That's something that Newcastle put me in the situation, right? By at least giving me the impression that this house would work. I know it's not an approval. I know, and I'm not trying to complain about it. I'm trying to be as flexible as possible, but
Sure.
I'm
Yeah.
asking for the conditional approval, I would say, because I just can't tell you that on Tuesday, the contractor doesn't say, you know what, I'm fed up with waiting. Thought it was gonna be a couple weeks ago.
So, it's not that I'm speaking personally, I'm not sympathetic. But our liability for approving something that is what we've been presented with is actually in violation of the standards of the code. We can't do that. That's not something we are allowed or authorized to do, even with a conditional approval. So at the moment, the only path we have is to amend the application and reconsider it.
Oh, so
Or-
there isn't an option for an emergency or a conditional approval?
I don't see a way to do a conditional approval of the application as presented, because I can't consider this as part of the application. I can't consider the image on your laptop as part of the application
Yeah,
legally.
And I've tried to be kind of flexible here, but I know we talked about when materials are supposed to be in for the planning board meeting.
Exactly.
And because obviously I'm new starting, this is kind of try to be, soft about it, but I just worry about, especially accepting new materials at a meeting starts to become, tough. It's just something to consider about, what happens next time.
Well, we have processes spelled out in the administrative section of the code. And I don't see a path forward with the application that we have.
So flip my question to him on its head. When can we have a emergency? He says he can get this done tomorrow.
So
We do have to notice it.
you have to notice it.
It's basically what's typical for the municipality. The state kind of makes it, they give you enough rope to hang yourself, so.
Yeah, we legally can't meet without notice. So like even if you submitted it tomorrow, we can't meet.
Yeah,
So what is that?
We have to put it in the paper that we're
Yeah.
gonna meet, so. Yeah, so it's
Yeah.
the earliest we can actually meet is next Thursday. By law.
yeah, and that would be the day that the notice comes.
No, it comes out Wednesday.
Okay, well, so it'll be the day after.
I think at this point, that's the clearest path forward, and I think sounds like it's simple enough to do. To get the application amended, just table it for now. Submit it with a new design. We'll come back in a week if that's. You look like you want to say.
I just have a quick, it might be a stupid question. As far as what you can physically do on the property before being issued a building permit. I mean, there's nothing saying you can't dig a hole on your property.
There is.
There is. Okay, so.
It's not a
I just
stupid
wanted-
question. It's a.
I just
great
wanted to make
question.
sure that
Yeah.
that was actually
Yeah.
like, because technically if you just. I mean, between digging a hole and putting some forms up, nothing's permanently getting. Constructed.
Yeah.
I mean, it takes more than a week to dig a foundation hole and put up forms.
Right.
Before they can pour, so.
I
I just wanted to make sure
Yeah.
that there was actually something saying that
Yeah.
was.
There's something in the code that says you're not allowed to move, basically move.
No
any-
construction will happen.
Zero work.
Yeah, no construction will happen until a permit is acquired.
The code is made with stuff like that, regulations to be fairly inflexible because they don't, when they don't want someone who's gonna come before, who's not gonna come before the board to do something and be like, oh, well, I just dug a hole. So.
So, I mean, our process as outlined is that the town planner has to deem the application complete. Or it can be forwarded to the planning board for review.
Well, I'll say that the planning board really they determine whether something's complete officially.
Officially, yes.
So, with a lot of this, I would just like bringing stuff, because it probably was going to be complete. There may have been some new details and stuff that were coming in, but I don't think it changed the.
Well, it's good to
completion
have
of
the information.
So.
Like I said, happy to talk about options and everything, but it can't be considered under the review of the application. See. Because then you're just doing it on the fly. Anyone come in and say, oh, I want to build a tower and blah, 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 and just start drawing on a napkin. Then we're gonna say, oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, that's not how it works.
And that's the normal, I think, routine is usually like. I think the policy is what, like, you need to have your complete application in 2 weeks before the meeting, and that's like the
We only require one.
routine, 1 week, okay.
Yeah.
So,
And that's to have the weekend. Basically. Which we greatly reduced. The old standards in the old code was. Notice in the paper twice, I don't know if it was 3 weeks or a month before. I mean, it was ridiculous.
and I
There's a
think this
lot.
is also a small
7 copies.
project, so
Right.
it's
Yeah.
a small project plan, so you don't need, doesn't need to be a public hearing.
Doesn't have to be a public hearing. It's not a large project, not a special permit. Yeah, right. It's the most flexible of the permit types we have. Or simple, I guess I should say. Flexible, simple.
May I ask one other, I guess, procedural question, and we're at 8:30. If I were to submit this revised plan to the code enforcement officer with C Street now resolved, would there be anything barring the code enforcement officer from simply granting me a building permit tomorrow?
Yeah,
He
it's not
doesn't-
in his bailiwick anymore. It's ours.
Well, this would be a different application.
We would have to deny this application. We'd have to submit another one, and then he'd have to have time to review it. And then he has up to 30 days.
I'm not saying it's a
No,
good
I'm just
idea.
letting
I
you
was
know.
just spitballing because I know
Yeah.
he can just approve these. He doesn't have to bring the planning board in. Am I correct to?
Yeah, I mean, at the same time, he could also just kick it back here.
He could.
So-
So this would be another, conversation with George Chase. Hey, what would you do with this?
Right.
I'm wondering whether to have that conversation with George Chase. I also don't want to cut your guys' legs out. If you want to be the ones to do this, and I appreciate you granting an emergency meeting, That's very helpful. I was wondering if that's actually the easiest path forward. If you guys like the full box plan and think that works, and if I can get that application to George, does that work, or is that like not kosher?
Michael is absolutely correct. You're running a risk there. You're willing to take on that risk. Procedurally, we can deny your application tonight.
Oh, okay, yeah.
You can resubmit a new application to the CEO. He may decide it still needs to come to planning board. He
Got
may
it.
decide to take up to 30 days to review it.
So that sounds like a bad risk to take. I was asking just in case it was a creative.
It is a
Way
creative
to-
way to think about it, but we can't speak to him. He's a different reviewing authority than we are. So it's not a bad idea. It's a great way of thinking outside of the box. I think your fastest path to approval is to work with the planner for the next couple of days of the day,
Yeah.
whatever you need, submit it, notice it, come back to us on Thursday.
And you mentioned a 1 week, I mean, that's already like come and gone unless I get it in by midnight. Are you guys
No,
okay receiving
fine.
this in the next few days? And
Well,
we could be,
Yeah, I mean, I'm really only supposed to be here Thursday.
you're
So
only
it's-
gonna be here Thursday.
Well, I mean, so I'm just, I'm happy to make time for this. It's just when. So, but why don't we say like, yeah, I'm not gonna be able to do it tomorrow. Probably look at it Monday. But that's,
Well, again, what we're talking about, just so I understand.
Yeah, that's-
it-
that's a
The
good point.
path forward here that I'm proposing is to not approve or deny, but to table. And allow you to amend the application. And when you bring an amended application, only thing that needs to be looked at are the amendments.
Mhm.
So it's not the whole kit and caboodle again. He doesn't have to spend time preparing anything else. It's just the changes.
Yeah.
Right?
that's,
So from a time perspective, that's again.
Yeah.
Limited.
no, that won't take a whole day. So that's
That's right. And, but he
I
still
hope.
has to prepare a memo about the change and amend the finding of facts to
Okay.
reflect the changes. And he needs time to do that before next meeting. And we need time to notice in the paper because that's the only way we're legally allowed.
And that needs to be done Tuesday,
so
very late.
Michael, I'll get you
Notice, you
drawings.
notice that we're doing.
To have it.
Yeah, well, we can, I think usually we deal with, I don't know, but I was gonna say, usually we deal with it. We need to get it on the newspaper and then we spill it.
Yeah.
So I don't need to be in the office to get the
No.
office to get that done
No.
Monday.
You just email the town manager.
Yeah, I'll let them,
Yeah.
we can. Yeah, I think that should. be.
I think that, I mean, does anyone have any other?
That's a good plan.
other way to think about it?
Safest, it's the safest way to tackle it. And have a delay,
But It's
but the
not, a-
least, but the least challenging delay.
that's not a month.
I do appreciate you having the flexibility of adding a meeting. I'll do everything I can to get everything submitted, so it's a,
All you have to
Quick
focus on are the windows
throw windows in the south facade
and decide which route you're going
and render it
and
with
render it.
some level of detail. I assume I don't need the full like truss plan and
You
everything
don't
all
need,
done.
no,
Yeah,
just the elevation.
Yeah, okay.
But I would also suggest, look at windows on every face, because that was, when I looked at it, I looked at just like each floor individual. So.
Okay,
Not a facade.
Right, that's what I mean, so. I mean, so I guess. If I understand this, a blank wall with no window is a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know
Generally
there are,
speaking.
that's that, because I just know that, I'm just thinking that. On that rear, the addition that would look into the garage kind of from the back porch, no window there, so that's something that. You're gonna wanna stick a window.
The rear addition. Well, wait a minute,
so looking out over
just a second. Before we go any further,
the windows needed in the
I mean,
addition.
we can talk about this
Talking about this
offline.
here.
Yeah,
that's an addition. There are no.
there's no windows.
There's
for
no
that.
window
Okay.
standards for that addition, but good catch.
Okay.
So,
So, but
yeah.
just for all of the, I mean.
For
point
all
is-
the facades that have requirements,
We want to make sure there's
We
20%
wanna make sure there's
for
20%. Yeah, correct, okay. The addition, in other words, all of that rear addition. It doesn't have to have windows on any of it.
That's great. Well,
All the part that is in
I
addition,
mean,
The part that is an addition.
but it's not all addition.
No, just that.
You had some. windows in-
the massing,
You already had windows.
the single story part is not an addition. Is that how we might interpret that maybe?
The single story, basically what wraps
Oh, there's garage
the
doors,
south
so I don't
side
think-
to the,
I'm just thinking like the parts that attach to the addition. The single story parts that attach to the addition. Or those are not an addition, those would be massing components.
no, it's an addition, because we don't regulate massing or architectural components on the rear of buildings in that district. So technically speaking.
I'll have to wrap my head around additions,
I know.
which is.
Yeah, technically speaking, the rear of the building could literally have no windows.
Okay. Then that's,
The north facing garage door component would need to have something, correct? Because it is a,
The north facing,
yeah, the garage door, and this gets back, not to argue against what would be an easier thing, but I think earlier you guys were comfortable with the garage doors being enough of an opening. Is
Yeah.
that?
I think that's
correct?
the general
think-
consensus.
yeah.
So I just want to make sure with the window thing, just to make sure what I'm drawing. I don't need to go draw garage doors that are like all glass.
No.
For this.
right.
Okay, okay. All right. So I won't do that. I'll make sure that the other facades have enough windows, something.
Yeah.
As soon as I can, and I'll get a schematic of the make it a box plan. Right? that fills
Or this
in
one.
with-
Whichever you like.
Whichever you-
I do. I see a path forward with this one. I do.
I run the risk of. Okay.
If you submit it and. Yeah, you do. There is a little bit of a risk.
There's a risk that if I submit it, Michael says, yeah, that should be good. I send it to you guys and say, actually, you know what? That dormer is into something or other.
Review the standards for dormers. That's the best I can tell you.
Well,
we've
can I,
looked at
I
it.
know we're already over, but can I tell you the thing that makes me nervous about this?
Yeah.
And this may be something. But the facade right here. Breaks for the roof.
Yeah.
And then continues
Uh-huh.
here for the dormer.
Yeah.
And then breaks again. And then recontinues.
And are you concerned about the,
The interpretation
Main massing?
must be- Yes, main mass.
I think that I don't think it should be a problem if you follow that eve line, the bottom part there.
Yes.
The eve, it kind of goes in and out, but I think that you can continue that all the way along across. So basically the floor of the second floor, except for the rear part, is a rectangle.
Yes.
So I think that it should work still. Because if you were to cut off those three dormers,
The roof
would
would just
look
come
The
weird.
straight
roof
down.
would come all the way straight down.
The roof is a single,
The roof is a red.
it's a plane.
That's what makes the cross cables
right, and not,
massive.
just, I mean, not that this needs to be voted on, but does anybody?
No, but
see
that's
any
my
concern?
understanding as well. From reading the definition of cross cable, those two on the second floor would be cross cables, the one in the middle would be a dorm. And I mean, I've just read all the standards and I again can't say, oh, yeah, you're good, but I
Under,
don't
understood.
see anything that's like tripping me up. Does anyone else see anything that's?
That should, yeah, and I think the other way, both of them shouldn't have an issue with main mass. Those were, when I was thinking about how could this work, those were kind of like, this is what it would look like if it was in compliance. I didn't think three dormers, but whatever.
Yep.
So,
Then I'm not gonna call for a vote on any of this stuff. Instead, I'm going to, without objection, table the application. Then we don't. Now we do. Yes. Now we make a motion to have an emergency meeting in one. This time, 6:30 in this room. And direct the planner to coordinate with the town manager to get it in the paper.
Oh, second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? All right, that passes 5-0. So the application is tabled. We will reconvene in 1 week at 6:30. We will only be reviewing the amendments to the application. And we'll receive an updated packet with a note from you. Yes. Awesome. All right. Thank you very much. That was a lot to get through, everybody. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you as well. I know it wasn't straightforward and easy.
You know, sometimes there's difficult ones. And it's, I will say sort of off the record, the challenge of these types of applications is that one might look at it and say, oh yeah, that's fine. And unfortunately, that's not the standard to which we have to apply the application. We have to apply it to what's written. So it's a little bit of a disconnect because one might say, well, I don't see what's wrong with that. Maybe not. But what we're not doing is we're not approving applications based on what we like and what we don't like. And that's what makes it fair for everyone. All right. Thank you very much. We're done with that one. There's only two quick things I want to say real quick. Do we have any public comment other than? No? New business. We don't have any public hearings, but I wanted to say that I did receive, thank you very much, Sven.
Thank you.
I did receive an email today from MMA saying that June 7th is their next available planning board and appeals. Did everyone get that email? I'm just wondering.
Might be in your.
I wanted to make sure you saw it in case you wanted to go.
June
If you
7th.
want to go, thank you, Ben. Talk soon. If you want to go, notify the town manager. There are funds set aside to go. There's a very minimal. The second thing is that I did finally remember to ask the town manager for digital copies of the MMA planning board manual, which I got. There's a manual, which I got today in digital format. I didn't have enough time to email it to you all, but I'll email. I have a very antiquated paper copy that's like that thing. I'm gonna burn it.
The digital copies.
The digital copy is not that. So I will be sending that around to y'all. We get that free of charge. So you just put it in your file. So have it referred to it. A lot of good information.
You don't know the open version.
I wish. Because it is voluminous, 470 pages or something. It's ridiculous.
And it's dry.
It's very.
Yeah.
I love how I read the cover letter, because and it tried to make it sound all exciting and everything. It's like, no, you're not winning anybody over here. Pretty dry stuff. All right. No planner report. We all good?
Yeah, no, this is happening.
Without objection, meeting adjourned 8:44.